Alright, so this is the video for lesson 1.3. This is our lesson on multi-step equations. We've been looking at 1-step, 2-step, 3-step, and now we're just going to add on extra steps to make it 4, 5, 6, and so on. The warm-up for this lesson starts with something similar to last time, showing you a question that you haven't quite seen before, but on the basis of that, asking you to practice and follow the method here. So we looked last lesson at distributive property and also on Monday's virtual lesson as well. So 4 times 3x is 12x, 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. So we're trying to get rid of the parentheses here to just basically get a simple equation without that. Now we're always looking for our x's, but notice this time we have two terms with x's on. Now I only have one term that has numbers on. So what I really want to do this time is I want to move my x's, not necessarily to the left, but I want to move them away from the numbers. So I want to take away 12x from both sides. So if I subtract 12x from here, it will cancel. And if I do 20 take away 12, I'll end up with 8x. And then from here, you can just say divide by 8, and end up with your answer of negative 1. So it's a different type of, this is actually just a two-step equation, but it's one which has two variables. Whereas last lesson we had actually ones with two variables and two numbers. We actually had an extra number over here. So this is actually kind of easier than that question, but sometimes with there being less terms here, that can be a little bit more confusing. If you weren't in class, certainly go ahead and pause the video for about 5 to 10 minutes. Try questions 1 and 2, which you can see the answers here for, and then 3 and 4, if you have time, try on those. And for those of you that tried those questions, here's the answer to the warm-up. You can see that I distributed at the first step here. And same thing as before, I have x's on both sides, but I only have numbers on one side, so I bring numbers to one side. Same with question 2, go ahead and distribute. I'm going to bring my numbers all to the right on this question because I've got a number here. So take away 6x from both sides, and just be careful as we're writing this down that we bring the negative sign with this. So negative 3. Divide both sides by 2. No decimals, please. No negative 1.5. We just want to leave it just like that as a fraction. As we get on to question 3, very similar. This time, though, we're going to move our letters. Once again, we've got letters on both sides and numbers on this side. So I'm going to move all my letters to this side. So positive 6x, do the opposite, negative 6x. 1x take away 6x is negative 5x. And then for your last step here, you would divide by negative 5. Be careful not to leave it as 3 over negative 5, though. Make sure you bring that negative to the top. Positive divided by a negative is a negative. So you should have negative 3 over 5 and not 3 over negative 5. And the last one, this was our special case from last lesson. 3 times 3x is 9x. 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. And notice I've got x's on both sides, but notice it's the same number as well, which is not true for the other questions. So when you take away 9x from both sides, they actually both cancel. You get left with nothing at all, so 0. 0 does not equal negative 6, therefore you'd have to say no solution. If you ended up with something like negative 6 equals negative 6, that's that special case where you'd want to put infinite solutions. And the summary of that is from last time was here. We looked at a couple of questions. When we end up with a different number, notice we have the same number of x's, so they cancel. When you just end up with a number equals a different number, you can put no solution. And if you end up with the same number, you can say infinite solutions. Once again, 12x and 12x. So whenever we have the same number of x's on both sides, it's going to cancel, and we just got to look what happens to the numbers. And a little summary on the bottom to make that easier as well. Different numbers, no solution. Same number, infinite solution. So last lesson, we were looking at questions where we did have variables on both sides, like in the warm-up, but also numbers on both sides. And when that happens, you generally want to try and bring your variables to the left-hand side. So by doing opposites, 5 take away 3 is obviously 2. Bringing numbers to the opposite side away from the variable, find a variable, and then do the opposite of this term. So instead of adding 7, you can subtract 7, giving you 4. And then that last step, of course, as we're times in by 2, the last opposite would be to divide by 2. So while we're doing multi-step, we've got one extra step here. Last time, these were the steps we had for 3-step. So today, the 4th step is distribute any parentheses. And we already had some of those in our warm-up, but they weren't 4-step problems. And we had some in our warm-up last lesson too. So I'm talking about questions like this with 2 sets of parentheses. So 4 times 2x, 4 times negative 1. Make sure you're multiplying both of those two terms. Same on this side, 3 times x, 3 times 2. And actually, once we've multiplied out our parentheses, this is no different from what you're actually doing last lesson, because I have variables on both sides, and I have numbers on both sides. And that's the whole point of building up gradually. By doing a 3-step equation and knowing how to do that, the 4-step equation only involves learning one new line, this line here. So I'm looking where I've got my x's on both sides. I want to move this one across to this side by doing the opposite. So instead of positive 3x, I'm going to do negative 3x. That will cancel on this side. And on this side, it will leave 5x minus 4. Positive 6, I'm just going to write down as 6, but you can put positive 6 if you wish. Once I've got my x's by themselves, I want to move things away from the x. So this negative 4, move it to the side by doing the opposite, which is to add 4, giving us 5x equals 10. And then that last step, of course, divide by 5, divide by whatever the number of x's is, times by 5, the opposite's divide, gives us an answer of x equals 2. Once again, lining up the equal signs, trying to go down the page, trying to write down my opposites at each step, but very similar to what we did in that previous lesson. Second example, not really any major differences. We're just going to multiply out again, 4 times 2x, 4 times negative 1. And we've got x's on both sides again, so this is like last lesson now. So I'm going to bring the 8x across to this side and subtract. And I actually made this one slightly easier. Sometimes when you cancel 9 take away 8, you could put 1, but we really just want to put x. Remember, 1x is just x. Negative 12, but very important for this one, not 4 though. You make sure you look at the whole term as well. Look at the sign in front. So negative 4. Bring the term away from the x, so instead of subtracting 12, we're going to add 12. And that's actually, we finished for this one. X equals 8, you are done for this one. We don't have to divide by anything because there is no number in front of the x for this one. So sometimes you can get a slightly easier question when you're doing those. Now this would be the point in the lesson when we started to practice actually doing some of these questions. So make a start on these questions. The answers are on the side here. If you're not getting those answers, that might be the time to use after-school tutoring or office hours to get some additional help. But make a start on these. Most of them are positive numbers to begin with. At the very end, I put a fraction here. And by the time you get to number 8, you shouldn't need me to check anymore. You should be able to practice that one by yourself. After a short while in class, we then moved on to our next, move on from 4 up to 5 and beyond. So we still have parentheses here, but we've just got actually on the same side of the equation, and we've got them equal to a number. So same idea as before. Whenever we see parentheses, we know we want to remove those parentheses by multiplying. Here we're actually going to multiply by negative 5, so I deliberately coloured in the blue here on that sign to show you that. So 3 times x, 3 times negative 2. Negative 5 times 2x, and negative 5 times negative 3. If we're not good with our negatives, just use a calculator, but 2 negatives when multiplied will make a positive. Now here's where people do get confused. I am not moving things from one side of the equation to the other side right now. I am just focused on this left-hand side of the equation. And I'm going to collect my terms together that are like terms. Kind of like the homework that we did from the textbook, where we had our shapes. So 3x take away 10x, I can actually simplify. Negative 7x. And negative 6 plus 15 is positive 9, so I'm going to put plus 9. Be careful not just to look at the 6 and say 6 plus 15. Just as we looked at the sign in front of 15, make sure you look at the sign in front of the 6 as well. Equals 23. So I just simplified here. That's why I didn't do the opposite. I didn't add 10x here because I'm not moving it from one side to the other. If I want to move this across to here, then yes, I would add 10x. Right now I'm just saying what is 3x take away 10x. This from here, this is actually just a 2-step equation. Move the 9 across because we want to move it away from the x. So take away 9 from both sides, giving us 14. And then last step, remember not plus 7, you're timesing by negative 7. So the opposite would be to divide by negative 7, giving you an answer of negative 2. And our last question, which is the most complicated one, we actually have 3 sets of parentheses here. But we're just going to follow that same idea. Whenever we have parentheses, we're just going to do the distributing. It's just that we have to do it 3 times. So just check that you agree with that. I put them in different colours to make it stand out a little better. And before I start combining and moving things across, or perhaps I should say, I am going to combine before I move things across. On the left-hand side of the equal sign, just combine terms here. So 2x plus 3x is 5x. 8 plus 18 is 26. And then now this is your 3-step equation from last lesson. So we can move the 4x across to the left by doing the opposite. Take away 4x. And instead of adding 26, you can take away 26. And actually, this one stops at this point as well, because when we did 5 take away 4, we just got 1x. So once it's x, that's actually the answer for this one. At this point, we then return back to the questions, allowing students time to finish off section A. And then for section B, the instructions are you should do at least 2 questions from either B or C. C is the easier of the sections because you have parentheses equals parentheses. And on this side, you actually have them on the same side, so you actually have to do some combining of terms and then moving around as well. Answers have been provided at the bottom, so you can still check how you do them. Everything once again except for that last answer. Notice the harder section, some of these fractions are not particularly nice numbers, whereas on this side here, we actually have whole numbers here as well. So you might want to try perhaps some of each just to make sure. You could be asked questions as difficult as these ones, perhaps not quite as difficult as B6 and B5. I think they're a little long, but certainly questions B1 to B4 would be pretty reasonable questions to ask. And anything from the section C would also be a pretty reasonable question to ask as well. That does it for this video. Make sure you go practice now and come back with any additional questions that you might have.